The Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, 2003 is an act of the Parliament of India to institutionalise financial discipline, reduce India's fiscal deficit, improve macroeconomic management and the overall management of the public funds by moving towards a balanced budget. The main purpose was to eliminate revenue deficit of the country and bring down the fiscal deficit to a manageable 3% of the GDP by March 2008. However, due to the 2007 international financial crisis, the deadlines for the implementation of the targets in the Act was initially postponed and subsequently suspended in 2009. In 2011, given the process of ongoing recovery, Economic Advisory Council publicly advised the Government of India to reconsider reinstating the provisions of the FRBMA. Enactment. The Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Bill was introduced in India by the then Finance Minister of India, Mr. Yashwant Sinha in December, 2000. Firstly, the bill highlighted the terrible state of government finances in India both at the union and the state levels under the Statement of Objects and Reasons. Secondly, it sought to introduce the fundamentals of fiscal discipline at the various levels of the government. The FRBM bill was introduced with the broad objectives of eliminating revenue deficit by March 31, 2006, prohibiting government borrowings from the Reserve Bank of India 3 years after enactment of the bill, and reducing the fiscal deficit to 2% of GDP. Further, the bill proposed for the government to reduce liabilities to 50% of the estimated GDP by year 2011. There were mixed reviews among economists about the provisions of the bill, with some criticizing it as too drastic. Political debate ensued in the country. Several revisions later, it resulted in a much relaxed and watered-down version of the bill with some experts, like Dr. Soumitra Choudhury of ICRA Limited, and now a member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, commenting, all teeth of the fiscal responsibility bill have been pulled out and in the current form it will not be able to deliver the anticipated results. Unregistered trademark. Unregistered trademark. This bill was approved by the Cabinet of Ministers of the Union Government of India in February, 2003 and following the due enactment process of Parliament, it received the assent of the President of India on August 26, 2003. Subsequently, it became effective on July 5, 2004. This would serve as the day of commencement of this Act. Objectives. The main objectives of the Act were, to introduce transparent fiscal management systems in the country, to introduce a more equitable and manageable distribution of the country's debts over the years, to aim for fiscal stability for India in the long run. Additionally, the Act was expected to give necessary flexibility to Reserve Bank of India, RBI, for managing inflation in India. Content of the Act. Since the Act was primarily for the management of the government's behaviour, it provided for certain documents to be tabled in the Parliament annually with regards to the country's fiscal policy. This included the following along with the annual financial statement and demands for grants, a document titled Medium-Term Fiscal Policy Statement. This report was to present a 3-year rolling target for the fiscal indicators with any assumptions, if applicable. This statement was to further include an assessment of sustainability with regards to revenue deficit and the use of capital receipts of the government for generating productive assets. A document titled Fiscal Policy Strategy Statement. This was a tactical report enumerating strategies and policies for the upcoming financial year including strategic fiscal priorities, taxation policies, key fiscal measures and an evaluation of how the proposed policies of the central government conform to the fiscal management principles of this Act. A document titled Macroeconomic Framework Statement. This report was to contain forecasts enumerating the growth prospects of the country. GDP growth, revenue balance, gross fiscal balance and external account balance of the balance of payments were some of the key indicators to be included in this report. The Act further required the government to develop measures to promote fiscal transparency and reduce secrecy in the preparation of the government financial documents including the union budget. Fiscal management principles. The central government, by rules made by it, was to specify the following: a plan to eliminate revenue deficit by March 31, 2008 by setting annual targets for reduction starting from day of commencement of the Act, reduction of annual fiscal deficit of the country, Annual targets for assuming contingent liabilities in the form of guarantees and the total liabilities as a percentage of the GDP. Borrowings from Reserve Bank of India equals. The Act provided that the central government shall not borrow from the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, except under exceptional circumstances where there is temporary shortage of cash in particular financial year. It also laid down rules to prevent RBI from trading in the primary market for government securities. It restricted them to the trading of government securities in the secondary market after an April 2005, barring situations highlighted in exceptions paragraph. Exceptions, national security, natural calamity or other exceptional grounds that the central government may specify were cited as reasons for not implementing the targets for fiscal management principles. Prohibition on borrowings from RBI and fiscal indicators highlighted above, provided they were approved by both the houses of the Parliament as soon as possible, once these targets had been exceeded. Measures to enforce compliance. This was a particularly weak area of the Act. It required the Finance Minister of India to only conduct quarterly reviews of the receipts and expenditures of the government and place these reports before the Parliament. Deviations to targets set by the central government for fiscal policy had to be approved by the Parliament. No other measures for failure of compliance have been specified. Implementation targets and fiscal indicators subsequent to the enactment of the FRBMA, the following targets and fiscal indicators were agreed by the central government: revenue deficit, date of elimination March 31, 2009, minimum annual reduction €0.5% of GDP. Fiscal deficit, ceiling €3% of the GDP by March 31, 2008, minimum annual reduction €0.3% of GDP. Total debt €9% of the GDP, annual reduction €1% of GDP. RBI purchase of government bonds to cease from April 1, 2006, 4 fiscal indicators to be projected in the medium-term fiscal policy statement were proposed. These are, revenue deficit as a percentage of GDP, fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, tax revenue as percentage of GDP and total outstanding liabilities as percentage of GDP. Jurisdiction the residuary powers to make rules with respect to this Act were with the central government with subsequent presentation before the Parliament for ratification. Civil courts of the country had no jurisdiction for enforcement of this Act or decisions made therein. The power to remove difficulties was also entrusted to the central government. Criticism: some quarters, including the subsequent Finance Minister Mr. P. Chidambaram, criticized the Act and its rules as adverse since it might require the government to cut back on social expenditure necessary to create productive assets and general upliftment of rural poor of India. The vagaries of monsoon in India, the social dependence on agriculture and over-optimistic projections of the task force in charge of developing the targets were highlighted as some of the potential failure points of the Act. However, other viewpoints insisted that the Act would benefit the country by maintaining stable inflation rates which in turn would promote social progress. Some others have drawn parallel to this Act's international counterparts like the Gramm-Rudman-Hollings Act and the Growth and Stability Pact to point out the futility of enacting laws whose relevance and implementation over time is bound to decrease. They describe the law as wishful thinking and a triumph of hope over experience. Parallels were drawn to the U.S. experience of enacting debt ceilings and how lawmakers have traditionally been able to amend such laws to their own political advantage. Similar fate was predicted for the Indian version, which indeed was suspended in 2009 when the economy hit rough patches. Suspension and reinstatement. Implementing the Act, the government had managed to cut the fiscal deficit to 2.7% of GDP and revenue deficit to 1.1% of GDP in 2007-08. However, given the international financial crisis of 2007, the deadlines for the implementation of the targets in the Act were suspended. The fiscal deficit rose to 6.2% of GDP in 2008-09 against the target of 3% set by the Act for 2008-09. However, IMF estimated fiscal deficit to be 8% after accounting for oil bonds and other off-budget expenses. In August 2009, IMF had opined that India should implement fiscal reform at the soonest possible, enacting a successor to the current act. This IMF paper was authored by two senior IMF economists Alejandro Sergio Simone and Pesha Topalova and highlighted the shortcomings of the current law along with proposed improvements for a new version. It was reported that the 13th Finance Commission of India was working on a new plan for reinstating fiscal management in India. The initial expectation for revival of fiscal prudence was in 2010 €11 but was further delayed. Finally, the government did announce a path of fiscal consolidation starting from fiscal deficit of 6.6% of GDP in 2009 €10 to a target of 3.0% by 2014 €15. However, eminent economist and ex-RBI Deputy Governor, S.S. Tarapoor is quick to highlight the use of creative accounting to misrepresent numbers in the past. Furthermore, he added that fiscal consolidation is indeed vital for India, as long as the needs of the poor citizens are not marginalized. This need for financial inclusion of the poor while maintaining the fiscal discipline was highlighted by him as the most critical requirement for the 2011 €12 budget of India. More recently, in February 2011, the PMEAC recommended the need for reinstatement of fiscal discipline of the Government of India, starting 2011 €12 financial year. In FY 2011 €12, it is almost certain that government will cross budgetary fiscal deficit target of 4.6% and it will be around 5%. States-level fiscal responsibility legislations in India. The 10th Plan of the Planning Commission of India highlighted the need for fiscal discipline at even the level of the states. This was to reduce the debt-to-GDP ratio of India. Reserve Bank of India, RBI, in its role as the ultimate financial authority in India, was also a keen supporter of the concept and publicly highlighted the need for state-level fiscal responsibility legislations in India. By 2007, the states of Karnataka, Kerala, Punjab, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh are among those which have already legislated the required fiscal discipline laws at the state level. Notes: Revenue deficit is defined in the Act as the difference between the revenue expenditure and revenue receipts which indicates increase in liabilities of the central government without corresponding increase in assets, formerly Investment Information and Credit Rating Agency of India Limited. The fiscal indicators was defined in this law as numerical ceilings in proportions to gross domestic product, as may be prescribed for evaluation of the fiscal position of the central government. References. External links. Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, 2003 Act No. 39 of 2003 online version.